Good morning, everyone. This talk, it says practical cryptography. It turns out that even the things that the fairly limited set of things I wanted to cover was too many. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory of cryptography. I mean, I'm not going to do any maths at all. You can rest safe there. But just about the concepts and the processes involved, to give you some kind of mental model of what it is that cryptography is all about, and which things you need to know about in order to use cryptography. The other thing I should say is that this is aimed at as a beginner's level, I hope. And inevitably, some of the things that I'm going to say, I will miss out what may seem to you to be vitally important bits of information. And I may play fast and loose occasionally with some things. It's not because I'm intending to mislead, it's simply because if I go into all the detail, everyone is going to glaze over, including me. So the main part of this talk is GPG, PGP. PGP was the original bit of software, stands for pretty good privacy. GPG is a version of the same spec of software written by the GNU project. So I'm going to cover what it is, basic management of keys, how to use the command line tool to encrypt, decrypt, sign, key management, that kind of thing. I'm not going to cover integration into mail clients. I'm not going to cover graphical user interfaces for them. I'd love to cover SSH and X509, but if I wanted to do all that, we'd be here until 4. So I'm not. If anybody's interested, I'm quite willing to do talks on any or all of those subjects at subsequent meetings. Right. Traditional cryptography. It's got a very long history, goes back at least as far as Julius Caesar. Basic idea is that you take some message that you don't want people to see and convert it into some random string of letters, or apparently random string of letters, that hides the meaning from anybody who happens to see it. And the way you do this is you have a process that does the mangling, and you'll have a key, which is some short piece of information. And the key alters the way that you mangle things, so if you change the key, you'll get a different mangled message out at the far end. And then to undo it, you basically run this process backwards using the same key, and you get your original message out. This is useful because if you want to send your message to somebody, you encrypt it using your key. There we are. You can then send that message across some communications channel, whether it's across the internet or writing it down on a piece of paper and sending a runner to marathon. When it gets to the far end, they can then run that process in reverse using the same key and get your message back and read it. The thing is that both of these keys have to be the same, so somehow you've got to get that key to this person. You usually do that by prearranging your keys. So, for example, in the Second World War, the keys were arranged in cipher books, and that said, on this day, you will use this key for your messages. And of course, both these keys have to be kept private. You can't tell anybody else about them, because if someone else in the middle gets hold of this and captures your runner or intercepts your message on the internet, they can then just do this process and decrypt it. So both sides have to have the same key, and they've got to keep the key private. Some of the more modern symmetric crypto systems, you may have heard of some of these. DES was developed in the 1970s by the US, or for the US government. I think it was developed by IBM. 3DES was an advancement on DES that was basically a bit better. Both of these are now starting to look rather shaky. You can pretty much brute force DES now on modern hardware. So recently developed AES, which was the winner of a competition. I think there were about 8 or 9, something of that order, 8 or 9 crypto systems that were submitted to the US government, and they picked on this one called Rheindahl, called it the Advanced Encryption Standard. Blowfish and Twofish were 2 other ones that were part of the same competition and are generally considered to be fairly good as well. There's a whole range of other ones. So that's what... Those are all symmetric systems which have the same key either side. Now, this is the core of the talk. This is the important bit. There's a thing called public key cryptography, which deals with some of the issues of having to share the keys on both sides, and allows you to do a whole load of other quite interesting things as well. So the idea here is that, again, we're turning our message into some bunch of garbage. And again, we have a process that takes a key. The trick here is that when you decrypt, you use effectively the same process, but you use a different key. And these 2 keys are related, so that when you encrypt using A, you can decrypt using B. So if you're sending a message to somebody, you encrypt using A, send the message across, decrypt using B. Now, the interesting thing is that because of the relationship between these 2 things, when I encrypt something, only the person with this B key can decrypt it. So, the B key has to be kept hidden, because anybody with the B key can read my message. The clever bit is that the A, we can let fly and be free, because I don't actually care if somebody else... Okay, this is one of these moments. I don't actually care that somebody else can encrypt a message, because only this person who's got this key can read it. So, yeah, have it. Don't care. That difference is the core of public key encryption. That's why it's called public key cryptography. This key is public. So, these are the 2 keys. The public key can be seen by anybody. The system is still secure. The private key must be kept secret. One of the reasons is that if you've got the private key, it's actually really easy to find out what that is, because of the mathematics involved. If you've got that key, it's very difficult to find that one. Occasionally they're called trapdoor systems, because it's really easy to fall down a trapdoor, but it's very difficult to get back up a trapdoor. So you can fall down the trapdoor that way, but it's very difficult to get back up out of the trapdoor that way. And when you generate these keys, they have to have a particular structure, again, because of the mathematics involved. So when you generate them, you'll always generate them together as a key pair, which is, again, a term that you may see if you do any further reading. Public key systems, there's not very many of them around, because they're actually really difficult to develop. RSA is the great granddaddy of them all. It's named after the 3 inventors of it, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman. And certainly Ron Rivest and Adi Shamir are still doing lots of good cryptography work. I haven't seen much from Edelman recently, but he's probably still working as well. It's a thing called El-Gamal, which uses different principles to the RSA. And DSA is the digital signature algorithm. I'll come on to signatures a bit later. You probably won't see many other public key crypto systems mentioned because they're very difficult to produce. The mathematical principles involved tend to fall down quite quickly once you start looking at them. And only those ones have really stood the test of time. The important bit, if you remember one thing, that's the thing to remember. What one key does, the other one undoes. Doesn't matter which way around you do it. Right. Signatures. No, we've swapped the A and the B here. A signature is a method of, as it says, signing a document so that the document can't be changed and still remain faithful to the signature. So it's basically saying, there is a document, here is a signature. If the document has changed and it doesn't match the signature properly, then you can tell. And it's really difficult to change the signature if you've changed the document. So the signature, you take your document, you run it through a process with your private key, because nobody else has that, so it must be you. And you're left with, the document is plainly readable, and you've got a signature tacked on the end. Send that through the internet. Somebody at the far end can then take the public key, the corresponding public key to this private key, and use that to check the signature and say, okay, yes, this person did sign this document and the document hasn't been changed.
If you ever have anything you actually need to be able to see written on the red, could you read it out loud, please?
Okay, sorry, yes. There isn't anything you need to be able to read. It's just a random number. In fact, I think that's the last bit of red there is. So, those are the important bits of the basics of cryptography. You've got encryption and you've got signing. So if you encrypt something, only the person that you've encrypted it to can read it. If you sign something, then it can be used as a guarantee that only you have written it. You can use both together. You can encrypt and sign so that only the person that you're sending it to can read it, and they've got a guarantee that you wrote it. So that the two are distinct. You can use one or the other or both, or neither, of course, but that's not cryptography. Right, part 2, GPG, PGP. This is the fundamental basis of most encrypted emails. And you can use it for encrypting individual files on disks. I should apologize for what's coming because there's an awful lot of text involved because most of it is the output of PGP. I've had to shrink the text a bit to fit some of it on. I hope it's not too small. The slides will be available after the talk, so don't bother trying to write it down, and I hope I've highlighted all the important bits. Right. What does GPG do? Pretty much everything. Encryption, decryption, signatures, signature checking, a thing called the web of trust, which I'll come to rather later. So I'm going to take you through a process of sort of simple use of GPG. This is all done on the command line, again, because there isn't enough time to talk about GUIs. So basically, how to create a key, encrypt and decrypt things, sign things, check signatures, manage your keys, and do key signing. Right. Creating a key. Very simple. GPG, gen key, generate key. It will probably sit there and generate a whole bunch of dots and chevrons and things on the screen as it thinks about and tries to find a suitable key for you. At some point it will almost certainly stop and say, I need more random bytes, and you basically leave it running, go away and do something else on the same computer. And as you type, it will take very precise timings of your keystrokes and take the very end bits of those precise timings. And those are pretty close to random data. And it then mangles that data to hide as much of the, to hide any patterns that might be in it, and uses that as random data. And eventually it will pick up enough random data to generate you a key. Can take some time, but generally doesn't. So please select what kind of key you want. And here again you see DSA and LGMAL, DSA, RSA. Basically you want that one. DSA and LGMAL. Your selection, number 1. Key pairs, bit lengths. The more bits you've got, the more secure your encryption is. It's fairly hard to put numbers on, like how secure a particular bit length is. As computers get more powerful, so the size of the keys that they can crack increases. As mathematicians get better algorithms for cracking this stuff, so the size of key that can be cracked increases. Generally speaking, unless you're really concerned about, the US government trying to break into your files and have you sent to Guantanamo, whatever GPG tells you is a reasonable default is probably a reasonable default. These guys keep tracks on, the latest advances and, who's claimed what. So, yeah, just go for the default. Would be my recommendation. It'll then ask you how long the key should be valid. You can have a key for any length of time you want. Personally, I probably wouldn't go for does not expire, because eventually that key is going to get compromised. Somebody will build a computer big enough to do it. So just to add a bit of, to prevent laziness, shall we say, put in a limit. I think the last key I generated was a 5-year key. I could be in dead trouble. Someone might produce a quantum computer or a new algorithm tomorrow. Then I've got to go and change my key. But, these things happen. You then need to put in some information about you, which is the identity that you're presenting as part of this key. And it's slightly confusing in terms of how it presents it here, but basically, when it says this form, Heinrich Heine der Dichter, Heinrich H. at whatever, you get the chance to put in 3 components. So the real name is this bit, the email address is that bit, and the comment is the bit in brackets. So you don't put the bit in brackets in your real name, you put it down there. So what I've done is, for my work address, I've put my name, my email address, and then in the comment I've put OMII UK or Southampton University. For my home key, I keep the keys separate. I have a key at home which has just my name and my email address, and then a comment which says preferred email address, so that people know when they look at my key which email address to use. So yeah, you've selected the user ID, Is this okay? Yeah, it's okay. You need a passphrase to protect your secret key. Enter passphrase. Again, I could probably give an entire talk on generating passphrases. It should be something fairly long, something you can remember. But
is it case sensitive?
Yes, it's case sensitive. You can put pretty much any character you like in there, including, depending on the type of terminal you're using, control characters and things. Right. I know people who have control characters and things in their passwords because I can see them coding stuff across from the control key when they type them in. Yeah, I'm not going to go into passphrases now. If we want to talk about passphrases, we'll do it at the end.
Quick question about that. What enforces it? Is the private key itself encrypted with that passphrase?
Yes. Yeah. So the passphrase, yeah, as you say, the passphrase is used to encrypt the private key on the disk, so that if somebody steals your hard disk, then they still need to have the passphrase to read your private key. But if they've got the file with your private key on, they can then try and brute force your passphrase and just basically run through every single possible combination or all the likely combinations. So you want to make your passphrase as long as possible to stop that. And you want to have as many different types of characters in there as possible, so lowercase, uppercase, numbers, symbols. If you feel confident about always being able to use a terminal that will take them, control characters, foreign characters, as much as you can in there, simply to make it difficult for people to brute force if they get hold of your passphrase, if they get hold of your private key. And then you get this bunch of fairly unpleasant stuff back, and if you get that, then your key's created. The important bits here: pub is your public key. 1024D, that's the length, and D is a DSA, signature assigning key. That's the identity of the key. That's generally what you'll use to refer to the key in any other GPG commands. Date it was created, date it expires. Next line down, the key fingerprint. That basically identifies the key uniquely. It's relatively easy to generate a key with the same ID. You can run through, just keep generating keys until you get one with the same ID. Generating something with the same fingerprint is many, many orders of magnitude more difficult. So the fingerprint is, as it says, it's the fingerprint, it's the unique ID for the key. Note, oh, you can't see it very well here, but that ID is actually the last bit of the key, of the fingerprint here. Next one down, UID, that's the user ID, and here's the information we put in earlier. So that's, if you like, the identity that you're presenting as part of the key. And sub here is a sub key, 2048-bit. The G is the El-Gamal encryption algorithm. Has a different identity. You probably won't need to use that. Again, creation date and the expiry date. Once you've got that, you're all done. Your key pair's been created. So, what do you do with it? Cryptography, first thing you think of is encryption. So, here's a file containing some secrets. There's my secrets. Probably don't want the enemy to get hold of that. So, GPG encrypt this file. you didn't specify a user ID, you can specify a target user, the person you want to send this file to, on the command line, or you can just do it this way. Enter the user ID, and again here you can either type in an email address or a name or the key ID. So if I go back one page, or back a couple of pages, so you can use basically any of these bits to identify the key, or you can use that to identify it. It's usually easiest to put in an email address because those tend to identify people uniquely. So here I'm using their email address. I'm using my email address. So I'm encrypting it to myself, so only I can read it. Type that in. Current recipients. There's all the details, so you can check that that's okay. End with an empty line, just hit return here. And I end up with that file generated. So it just takes the original file name here, sticks.gpg at the end. Actually, if I just go back, yeah, if you look at this file, you'll see that it's just binary junk. It's not. It won't even be readable. It might as well be random data. That's one of the things of good cryptography. A good encryption algorithm makes your data look as close to random as possible.
How do they compare size-wise?
Should be very close in size. This one will be slightly larger, and of course won't compress very well.
Do you have to delete them?
Yes, yeah, because otherwise someone will be able to read that. And you probably want to ensure that you use secure... No. You probably want to ensure you use some kind of secure deletion process on this, whatever that is. Again, we can talk about secure deletion for hours. Because if you just delete it, then the blocks of data on the disk will still be there, and someone who gets hold of your disk can read that data.
If you're encrypting it to multiple people, will it basically just decrypt it once for each person?
No, it will produce a single file which can be decrypted by any of the people on the list. I'm not going to tell you how it does it now, but I'll tell you how it does it later. It gets a bit involved. Decryption. So let's say we want to read this, because we've forgotten the details of the file. GPG minus D, decrypt my and then use the encrypted file. You need a passphrase to unlock for this user. Type your passphrase in here, and it will output it on standard out. So it'll come out on the screen. It won't write it to the disk. That's actually a security thing, because if it wrote it to the disk, you'd then have to remember to go and delete the file from the disk. If you genuinely do want it written to the disk, you can just use shell redirection, arrow to the file, and it will output that to the file. It can be quite useful to do this. For example, you can keep a list of all of the passwords that you use on various websites or whatever. Have that encrypted, and then when you want to read one, you can decrypt it and then just grep for the website that you're looking for, and it will give you one line with just that information on it. So it's kind of works the Unix way. Public key encryption also gives you signatures. So let's say he's decided to leave all his all his goods and chattels to the Battersea Dogs Home. So we can sign this. GPG ---- clear sign. Pass it the file. I think if you look, there's 3 different options for signing, or for signing files. ClearSign is the one that is generally used for things like email. I'll show you the output in a moment. Asks you if the passphrase, tells you what the key is as well, just in case you've got multiple keys. Once you've done that, you'll get... Is that right? Yes. So that's the original file, which is unsigned. This file, .asc, looks like that. And again, you've got 2 important bits here. Begin PGP signed message, #SHA1, don't worry about that. There's my message. And then tacked on the end of it, begin PGP signature. It's the version of the software that was used. And a bunch of, again, random looking stuff. That's the signature. Now, I won't say, okay, for all practical purposes, it's impossible to change that and have this match. It's also impossible to change that and generate a new one of these unless you've got the private key. So if somebody gets hold of this, even though they can still read it, if they change it to, give all their worldly goods to somebody else, then anyone who reads it can check the signature and say, hang on a minute, that's been changed. The way you do this, very simple, GPG ---- verify. In this case, the signature's good. I don't think I've got an example of a bad signature, but basically it says bad signature from. Key distribution. How do you get your public key to somebody? So if I want to encrypt some mail, to Harry, how do I get hold of his public key so that I can encrypt, send it to him so he can read it with his private key? The answer, a public key server. In theory, anybody could set up a public key server. In practice, almost everybody uses the same network of key servers. You can upload your key to the server. Other people can download it. They can then verify your signatures and send you encrypted files. And of course, if they've uploaded their keys to the server, then you can verify their signatures and send them encrypted files. Again, GPG does this for you. GPG send keys, key server, and these are the people, www.keys.uk.pgp.net. You can substitute UK with any country you like. Some of the servers don't work terribly well. I used to use the .eu server. It just doesn't work anymore as far as I can tell. But it doesn't matter which one you use because they all share. So if you upload to one, eventually it'll end up on all of the other ones as well. And you have to specify the key identity. And then it says, sending key to server, www.keys.uk.pgp.net, all done. Receiving keys, so if you want to get somebody else's key, or even an updated version of your own, GPG, receive keys, key server, whatever, key ID. This is actually my key ID. So if anybody wants to try this, that command will really genuinely work. Requesting the key from the server. I think I've got some, yeah, I've got some blue circles. So here we are. This key, public key, Hugo Mills, University of Southampton. There's my email address. Oops. Ignore this lot for the moment. I'm not going to go into any details about what that is, but I'll tell you in broad terms what's going on with this lot in a moment.
Presumably, GPG is then storing that key somewhere on your VIDO.
Yes, it's going into what's called your public key ring. So that there are two files in .gnu PG in your home directory.
Right, okay.
One is called secring, which is your secure ring, which is what's protected by your passphrase.
Right.
That has your private keys in it.
Right.
The other one is pubring, which is readable by anybody and contains all of the public keys that you've imported using this process, plus your own public keys. Done that. Right. So Harry's just picked up my key. How does he know that it's good? Because somebody else could have created a key, lied about it, said, yeah, I'm Hugo Mills, uploaded it, and then persuaded Harry to download my key, or download their key, pretending to be me. The answer is a thing called the web of trust. This is possibly the most complicated bit. Right. You can sign a key. When you sign a key, you are saying, I've checked that this person is who they say they are by some standard. I've verified that that person controls this key. And I trust this person to do those same checks when they sign other people's keys. And that last one's quite important. So, let's say that somebody says, my key is here. Download my key. So I download their key, but I've never met them. How do I know that their key is valid? Well, let's say I've signed somebody's key and checked that their key's okay. Then they've checked this person, said, yeah, this person's okay, their key's valid, I trust them. That person's done it to somebody else. And finally, this last person's checked the key that I'm interested in. So we've kind of got this chain of trust. So I've said, yeah, I trust this person to sign a key. They've said they trust this person to sign a key. They've said they trust this person. They've said they trust this person. So, yeah, maybe I could trust that this key is actually valid. Kind of a bit friend of a friend sort of thing, you know. But then what if there's another set of people who've done the same thing? And so that I've got two paths. Or maybe there's a third person who's gone fairly close, and maybe some of these people have checked off each other as well. And you start to get a slightly more confidence that that key might actually be valid. That's the web of trust. There's all sorts of numbers that get put on it. And that's what that block at the bottom of the key information tells you about. So it'll tell you about how many people you've got here relating to that key, and how many people you've got at the second layer here, and so on. And you can tweak that process if you really know how and want to govern how your copy of GPG is going to treat the web of trust. So you might say, okay, I'm only going to trust those people whose keys I've signed myself. You might say, okay, I'm only going to trust those people whose keys I've signed myself and those people whose keys they've signed, you might want to get more complicated. I'm not going to go into that because it's, again, horribly complicated. So, just to recap, signing a key is a statement that I believe and have verified that this key is controlled by a person matching the identity in the key. So, if you remember, you've got a name and an email address in the key. You need to be relatively sure that that name and that email address belong to that person. And it's fairly difficult to check this, but I trust this person to perform those same checks on other people. And there's a whole procedure that you go through to verify this bit. This bit, you're on your own. You're going to have to talk to them a bit, work out whether you trust them or not. If you've had an online conversations with them, then you'll have an idea about whether they actually know what they're talking about, whether they're competent to do this to within the degree that you're willing to sign them off as. So, before you go to a key signing, print out your fingerprint. It'll come out as 4 or 5 lines, normally, 4 or 5 lines of text. You can just copy that into OpenOffice or whatever, print out lots of copies and slice them up. When you meet, you meet somebody, you exchange fingerprint slips and ID, so you'll hand over a slip and your passport, and they'll hand you a slip and their passport. You check that the photo on the passport looks approximately like the person stood in front of you. Having recently applied for a new passport and had photos sent back the first time, they don't actually want a photograph that looks like you. And to the best of your knowledge, check that the ID papers that you've been given are genuine. How you do that is, again, up to you. Check that the name in the ID papers matches the name in the key details. Initial the slip and keep it, just in case somebody decides to pick your pocket and switch the slip for another one. And then hand their papers back, because otherwise they're going to get fairly cross with you. Interesting question, what do you accept for ID? Passport is pretty much the gold standard for this. National ID card, photo driving licence, any other form of government-issued photo ID. Governments are probably about the best people at working out ID. They're not terribly good at it, but some people will only accept a passport. Some people will accept other things. I'll take a passport. If I can recognise one, I'll take a national ID card as well. I don't like taking photo driving licences and other things. That's me. Some people believe the same. Some people will accept other forms of ID. That's up to you and your conscience. After you meet, so you've got a slip of paper that matches, a slip of paper with a key fingerprint on that matches the person and their ID papers. But you still need to check that the email address is valid. So that's what this bit does. You pull in their key from a public key server. If they haven't put it on a public key server, then you can't really do much about it. You print out the fingerprint of that key and check it with the fingerprint you've got on the piece of paper. You generate some random data. 64 bytes. Yeah, Make it more if you want, doesn't really matter. Store those random bytes on your hard disk or somewhere relatively secure for later reference. Encrypt that random data, mail it to them, and then ask them to send it back to you. So what you're doing is you're sending some data which is going to be difficult for anybody to guess because it's random. You're sending some difficult to guess data to somebody in a way that only the person with that key can read it. So if they can send the data back to you, there's a fairly good chance that the email address you've sent it to is being read by the person who controls that key. So you check the return mail, make sure that it does match. At that point, you've now tied up all the bits of information. You've checked that the physical person matches their passport, that their passport, the name in their passport matches the name in their key, that the ID of their key matches the ID of the key you've just downloaded, and that the email address in the key belongs to the person who has control of that key. That's all you need. You've now tied everything together, so you can sign it and upload it. So, GPG, ask certification level, sign key, and there's the key. There's some extra bits in there which I've cut out. It's not terribly important. Here's the information for my key. So, again, you've got the key ID here. You've got the fingerprint here to check. At the moment, it tells you trust unknown, validity unknown. Hasn't been checked yet. This key is due to expire. Here's the name and email address. Right. Yeah, sorry, fingerprint there. Right. How carefully have you verified the key? I will not answer. Yeah, not going to tell you. I have not checked at all. I have done casual checking. I have done very careful checking. Again, your choices of these two are up to you, but I think if you followed that process and verified their details against government-issued photo ID, I'd say that qualifies as pretty careful. So, careful checking, yeah, number 3. Are you sure you want to sign this key? I've checked this key very carefully. Really sign? Yep. Needs your passphrase. Then you've signed the key, but you only signed it on your local system. So you then need to send their public key with your signature on it back up to the public key servers. And you do that, GPG -1 send keys, and the key ID, as normal. Sending key, all done. When you do this, it doesn't just replace the key on the server, it merges it with the existing key, so that if 2 people upload close together, both having signed it, it will merge all the signatures together. So you don't need to worry about making sure that you're not overwriting anything. The key server handles all of that for you. Key management. The first thing is, what keys have I got? So you can list all of the public keys in your keyring. So just, who do I know? What public keys have I got? You can list them with all their fingerprints, or you can list them and show all of the signatures on the keys if you really want to. You can either do this for, as shown here, for all of the keys you've got in your keyring, or you can do it just putting in one of the search expressions, so the key ID, the name of the person, the email address. It'll show you all of the keys that match that. So that gives you how to find out what keys you've got, and a little bit of information about each of those keys. You can also do more complicated things to keys. This includes signing them, checking the signatures, adding and removing subkeys, which are the user identities. So if I want to have, say, my work key list me as Hugo Mills, brackets University of Southampton, and Hugo Mills, brackets Electronics and Computer Science at Southampton, I can do that. If I've got multiple email addresses, I can add those into the key as well as identities. And you can use edit key to do this, and it just adds more identities into the key. Or you can take identities out if it's no longer practical or useful to have that identity in. So if you've let an email address lapse or something, you can take that out of your key. You can change what are called the trust parameters. So this concept of how far down the web of trust are you going to believe signatures. And you can revoke keys. So if you lose control of a key, if somebody gets hold of your private key file, somebody breaks into your system, somebody steals a laptop, anything like that, anything where your key has become compromised, you can revoke a key. The great thing about this is that you get the option to save the changes on exit. So if you make a cock-up, you can not save the changes and you're back where you started, which has saved my bacon on a couple of occasions. And I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is revocation. If your key becomes compromised or you're not going to use it anymore for any of these reasons, you can use what's called a revocation certificate to cancel the key. The important thing here is you generate the certificate when you generate the key. Because if you don't and your laptop gets stolen, you can't generate a revocation certificate. That happened to me last year. And at that point, I then worked out how to use revocation certificates. So just after you generate your key, you generate a revocation certificate, give it the key ID, dump that to a file. You can do it any time you like, but it's best to do it when you generate the key. Keep it safe. Keep it on some piece of separate or removable storage. So USB key, floppy disk is the traditional one. Write it to a CD if you want. CDs are cheap these days. Keep that somewhere safe. Lockbox, safe, whatever. Desk drawer if you want. But again, remember that if someone breaks in, steals that storage device and then knows what to do with it, they can revoke your key, which may not want to happen. To revoke the key, import it into GPG, and then send your revoked certificate back up to the key servers. And then anybody who updates your public key from the key server will then get a marker on the key saying this key's been revoked. And then when they try to decrypt anything or check a signature, they'll be warned that this key has been revoked. So that took me some time to find because I couldn't find it in any of the documentation. It says you can generate, all of these things. So you can generate a revocation certificate like this, and then send it to a key server. How do I do that? I've got this file. You do that bit first, and then you send it. GPG edit key has a help command. We'll give you an enormous list of the stuff you can do. GNUPG.org is the main website. That's probably the main things that you need to know, other, of course, than having a copy of this presentation to hand.